On New Year's Eve, while fireworks were lighting up the sky outside, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table and told me they were putting me in a nursing home because I was useless now. No anger in her voice, just certainty, as if my life had already been packed away. I smiled, finished my tea, and said nothing, because sometimes the quietest moments are when a person decides they won't disappear without a choice. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family and wondered what dignity looks like when no one expects you to have any left? The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight while the television murmured about fireworks in cities I no longer traveled to, and I sat at the dining table holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold, listening to my daughter-in-law speak about my life as if I weren't there. She didn't raise her voice or sound cruel, which somehow made it worse. "We think it's time," she said, glancing briefly at my son before looking back at me. "A nursing home would be best. You're not really useful anymore, and it's becoming a burden." The word useless echoed in my head, not loudly, but steadily, like a drip you can't ignore. My son stared at his plate, the way he used to when he was a boy caught between wanting to please me and wanting to avoid conflict. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I smiled, the polite smile I'd perfected over years of swallowing discomfort to keep peace, and nodded as if they were discussing the weather. Inside, though, something shifted. I thought about how I'd raised that same son alone after his father died, how I'd worked as a seamstress from home so I could be there when he got back from school, how my hands, now called useless, had once stitched uniforms, costumes, wedding dresses for neighbors who couldn't afford much but trusted me anyway. When he married, I welcomed his wife sincerely, cooked her favorite meals, watched their children when they needed help, tried not to offer advice unless asked. Aging crept in quietly. First the knees, then the fatigue, then the way people started speaking slower around me, louder, as if volume could replace respect. I moved into their house after a minor fall, reassured it was temporary, that family took care of family. Over time, I learned to make myself small. I took up less space in the fridge, less space in conversations, less space in their lives. That night, as the new year approached, I realized they'd already moved on without me. Fireworks burst on the screen, people cheering, counting down, while my future was being decided between bites of dessert. When my daughter-in-law asked if I understood, I said yes, because arguing felt pointless. But as I sat there, memories surfaced uninvited. The nights I stayed awake sewing by lamplight so my son could go on school trips. The way he used to run into my arms when I waited outside the classroom. The promise I'd made to myself after his father's funeral that my child would never feel abandoned. I wondered when my worth had become conditional, measured only by what I could still provide. After midnight, they went to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with the quiet hum of the house. I didn't sleep. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching familiar objects, the framed photos, the children's drawings on the fridge, the couch where I'd sat countless evenings telling stories. In my bedroom, I opened the small drawer where I kept important papers, more out of habit than intention. Inside was an envelope I hadn't thought about in years, labeled neatly in my own handwriting. Documents I'd prepared long ago, after watching friends lose everything when illness struck, after promising myself I would never be completely dependent on anyone, no matter how much I loved them. I sat on the bed and opened it, my heart beating faster with each page. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud now. I wasn't as powerless as they thought. I wasn't as finished as they'd decided. By the time the first light of morning crept through the curtains, I knew one thing for certain. If they believed my life could be boxed up and sent away without my consent, they had underestimated me. And as I folded the papers back into the envelope, I wondered how they would react when they realized I still had choices left, and that this new year would not begin the way they expected at all. Morning came quietly, without the celebration people expect on the first day of a new year, and I moved through the house as I always did, careful not to disturb anyone, even though I already knew I wouldn't be staying much longer. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes at breakfast, speaking to the children instead, while my son rushed through his coffee and left for work without saying much. No one asked how I felt. No one asked what I wanted. That silence confirmed what I'd felt the night before. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the lawyer who'd helped me organize my affairs after my husband died. My voice trembled at first, not from fear, but from the strange relief of finally speaking honestly. He listened without interrupting, then told me to come in whenever I was ready. I packed slowly, not because I had much, but because each item carried a memory, and I wanted to say goodbye on my own terms. When my son came home that evening and saw my suitcase by the door, confusion flickered across his face. I told him I'd made arrangements, that I wouldn't be going to a nursing home, at least not the one they'd chosen. My daughter-in-law's tone sharpened immediately, asking where I thought I was going, how I planned to manage, reminding me of my age. I handed my son a copy of the documents from the envelope, watching his expression change as he read. I hadn't told them about the small apartment I'd bought years ago using savings from my sewing work, or the modest investment account my husband had left me, or the legal protections I'd put in place to ensure my independence. Their assumption that I had nothing left to offer had blinded them to the truth that I still had agency. My son sat down heavily, rubbing his face, and for the first time that night, he looked at me instead of past me. He apologized, quietly, not for the plan itself, but for not defending me. His wife remained standing, arms crossed, clearly unsettled by the shift in control. I didn't argue or accuse. I simply told them I loved them, but I wouldn't stay where I was treated like an inconvenience. Leaving that house felt strange, not triumphant, not tragic, just necessary. In my new apartment, life moved at a different pace. I cooked for myself, rested when I needed to, took short walks in the afternoon, rediscovered the pleasure of choosing how to spend my time. The loneliness I'd feared didn't arrive the way I expected. Instead, there was a quiet sense of dignity in knowing no one was counting my usefulness anymore. My son visited a few weeks later, alone. He said the house felt different without me, that he'd realized how much I'd been holding together simply by being there. We talked honestly for the first time in years, about expectations, about fear of aging, about how easy it is to mistake dependence for love. Our relationship didn't magically heal, but it shifted into something more respectful. As for my daughter-in-law, she remained distant, but that was no longer something I tried to fix. I learned that boundaries aren't punishments, they're acknowledgments of self-worth. As the months passed, I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic sewing to people who wanted to learn practical skills. Watching younger hands struggle the way mine once had, I felt useful again, not because anyone needed me to be, but because I chose to be. On the next New Year's Eve, I watched fireworks from my own window, alone but at peace, thinking about how easily a life can be dismissed when people assume it's nearly over. I raised a glass of tea to myself, to the woman I'd been, and to the woman I was still becoming, knowing that usefulness fades, but dignity doesn't have to, if you're willing to claim it before someone else decides you no longer deserve it.